Today we are going to start with the second reading uh, of economics, the firm and market structures. In the initial reading, we discussed about elasticity, the types of elasticity, substitution and income effect, and so on and so forth. We then went on to the law of diminishing marginal utility. In this reading, we are discussing about the different market structures in the realm of our uh, convenience in whatever society we live in. Thereafter, we'll understand what each market structure has to offer, the basic characteristics, the demand and supply functions, the optimal price and output for firms in different market structures. The reading then runs into the long run equilibrium under each market structure and the different pricing strategies under the market structures under consideration. A couple of things before we start. This is an intense reading divided into a couple of video series. So I suggest that if you're not in a fresh mind, please pause the video, take a break, come back with a cup of coffee with a fresh mind, and then start. You will require to take down each and everything that's on the slide along with whatever things I say, so that it becomes a handwritten reference for you in terms of when you are revising the stuff later. So without any further delay, let's just jump into the reading. We'll first move into perfect competition and go about the characteristics of perfect competition. There are a large number of buyers and sellers, that each seller offers an identical product for sale, and therefore the name perfect competition, because there is no extra effort, there is no extra sale or any extra USP for the buyer in terms of the product. There are very few barriers to entry, and as I said, since the products are identical, there is hardly any pricing power. Let's assume a situation where two companies, as two shops, both are selling the same goods, exact identical goods. Do you think that one can charge a higher price and even sell one unit of that good? Probably no. There is non-price competition in the market. As they have no control over the pricing power, clearly they focus on non-price competition. We look at the demand in the perfectly competitive market. The market demand curve is a downward sloping curve, obviously due to income and substitution effect. And now we'll go into the following equation that exhibits the demand curve for this type of market. The price is 20 minus zero point 0.5 quantity demanded. Obviously, if you've gone through the appendix videos of demand, the demand function, the demand curve equation is price equals to something plus quantity. We all know the total revenue equals to price times quantity, and therefore the market total revenues equation is price times quantity, which is 20 minus 0.5 QD, which was the price, into the quantity demanded, and then the basic algebra takes place. Average revenue is calculated, as the name suggests, average revenue is calculated by the total revenue divided by the quantity demanded. Notice that the average revenue curve is the same as the demand curve, which means average revenue is price. We also must keep in mind the following relationships. The relationship between quantity demanded and price is linear. Own price is only determined by quantity demanded, that is, the price for a commodity X is determined the quantity demanded for commodity X. Marginal revenue is a derivative of the total revenue with respect to the quantity demanded. In CFA, we do not have this derivation and that derivative, and I have taken the shortcut by not highlighting the derivation of this marginal revenue. Marginal revenue, as I said, is the change in total revenue when there is one additional unit sold. So the change in total revenue that is achieved. The other day we were doing something known as the law of diminishing marginal utility, where we saw that as we consume more and more continuous units of water, a glass of water, the total revenue rises. So that change in total revenue because of consumption of one more glass of water is known as marginal revenue, and it is expressed by the following equation: change in total revenue by change in quantity demand. Price elasticity is represented by an absolute value. The LOS specifically does not ask us to go through elasticity. It was again covered in the previous reading, but I feel the importance of the topic, the respect that the topic commands, I have taken the liberty of putting elasticity of demand again in these slides, and we'll go through them again. Elasticity refers to sensitivity of change in quantity due to change in price, maybe due to change in income, due to change in price of complementary goods, or maybe due to change in price of substitute goods. Last, complementary and substitutes, they totally lead to cross price elasticity. Now let's go one by one into the different types of elasticity which I just briefly mentioned. Price elasticity of demand. It clearly shows the effect of change in quantity due to a change in price. It is expressed by the following equation, and price elasticity is negative, obviously because of the law of demand, and this negative is because in case of normal goods. When elasticity is greater than 1, what does it exactly show? It clearly shows that the demand is elastic. It means that for a 1% change in price, the quantity will change by 1.2%. Ceteris paribus, assuming price elasticity is 1.2. So it clearly shows that the buyer has a strong hold. For a 1% change in rise, 1% rise in price by the seller, the consumer will decrease the demand by 1.2% and the seller will be hit worse. When elasticity equals to 1, the demand is unitary elastic. A 1% change in price leads to a 1% change in quantity. Similarly, when price elasticity is less than 1, demand is inelastic. Example, healthcare. Even if the price of healthcare increases by 1%, we cannot drastically reduce our healthcare consumption needs. It will obviously be reduced. We'll obviously have that limited personal disposable income constraint, but keeping all that in mind, even all that said, elasticity will be there and will be less than 1. What exactly are the factors that affect this elasticity? Factors affecting price elasticity may be our allocation of our budget to that particular product. Example, salt. Even if price of salt increases by 10%, it's not even a percent part of our personal disposable income, our salary, our income. So we'll not mind. It doesn't matter. It's an insignificant part of our budget. If there are many close substitutes, it clearly shows that the buyer has options. He clearly has options for switching to product Y instead of product X, or product Z instead of product X or Y. So if a lot of substitutes and a lot of players are available, the price elasticity will be higher. Or contrary to point 1, if I spend 20% of my income to a particular commodity, then I will be sensitive to a price change for that commodity. In the long run, price elasticity will be higher, and this will be shown in the upcoming slides. along the demand curve that we just saw, we saw the equation, but in general, the demand curve is a downward sloping curve in which the price elasticity is higher at high prices and lower at low prices. Again, it is somewhat an extension to the budget or the price or the amount of personal disposable income spent on a particular product. Why exactly are we studying this elasticity? I had already mentioned this, but if a company operates in an inelastic market, a company such as healthcare or such as necessity items operates in a market where the demand is inelastic, an increase in price would decrease the quantity demanded, but the total revenue would still increase. And hence, as a financial analyst, I would like to invest in companies which are operating in an inelastic demand market. The reverse is exactly the true. If the company operates in a market where the demand is elastic, a decrease in price would increase an increase in price would decrease quantity demanded to an extent such that total revenue falls, and I would avoid investing in such companies. We clearly know that the relationship between marginal return and price elasticity can be expressed by marginal returns equals to price divided by 1 minus 1 by price elasticity of demand. I repeat, MR equals to price divided by 1 minus 1 by price elasticity of demand. If the sellers know the price and the different price elasticity of demand for the different products they engage in, they can clearly use that relationship, they can clearly use those numbers to determine the marginal revenue and then decide upon the demand and supply strategies. However, in a real life situation, this is a greatly challenging task. Identifying whether the price elasticity is 1.2 or zero point 0.8 or 0.6 or 1.8 for that matter is clearly a difficult task. The higher the price and marginal revenue of a particular good, the greater the producers have a will, an incentive, and the feeling to supply more of that particular commodity. Now let's move on to income elasticity of demand. It clearly shows a change in quantity demanded because of a change in income and is expressed by the following equation. It is positive because for normal goods, as income rises, we all have a feel to increase the consumption of a particular commodity. When our income rises, we feel like consuming more. So for normal goods, income elasticity is greater than 0. For a luxury good, income elasticity is again greater than 1. And if elasticity is less than 0, those goods can be classified as inferior goods. I would repeat, income elasticity expresses or shows the change in quantity demanded for a change in income. For normal good, it is greater than 0. For luxury goods, it's greater than 1, and for inferior goods is less than 0. I again allude to the fact that this has been covered in the previous reading and is not explicitly a part of this reading or the LOS under consideration. Let's move on to cross price elasticity of demand. Cross price elasticity of demand measures the change in quantity demanded because of a change in either the substitute or the complementary. It is expressed by the following equation. If the elasticity is greater than 0, the good is a substitute. Assume two goods, substitute goods, Tata salt and Patanjali salt, for let's say. If the price of Tata salt rises, the quantity demanded of Patanjali salt would rise, ceteris paribus, and therefore the two products are substitutes. Also, the cross price elasticity of demand is greater than 0. In case of complements, the cross price elasticity will be less than zero. What if there are close to substitutes available for a product? Not exactly substitutes, but yeah, mere maybe 80-90% close to substitutes. In that case, the lower the pricing power of the firms, the lower is the pricing power of the firms in selling the product. Because of the fact that if I increase my price, customers will shift to that other commodity, even if they are not perfect substitutes. 80-90% close, maybe 80-90 is again an arbitrary real life number. Okay, so the initial firm will have a lower pricing power on that product, and same is with the other firm. One important thing that you all must write down, understand, and imbibe is that for income and cross price elasticity, the demand adjustment is represented by a shift in the demand curve. Why so? The appendix videos that we have given clearly show that other other variable, any variable other than price that causes a change in quantity demanded happens via a shift in the demand curve, and hence for income and cross price elasticity, the demand adjustment or the elasticity adjustment is represented or take place by a shift in the demand curve. We now understand what does consumer surplus mean. In the diagram below, the area under the demand curve to the left expresses total utility derived by the consumer after consumption of his choice of product. The quantity purchased, the quantity purchased into the market price expresses the consumer's total expenditure. The price of a product is 10 and consumer consumes 10 units of that product, so consumer's total expenditure will be 10 into 5, whatever, 5 into 10, 50. The difference between the total value derived from quantity purchased and the total cost spent by the purchase of that commodity equals to the consumer surplus. Alternatively, consumer surplus can be defined as the difference between the amount that a consumer is willing to spend, willing and able to spend, and the amount he actually spends on that particular commodity, obviously. We now move on to our next topic, which deals with supply analysis in perfectly competitive markets. We all know as price rises, firms are willing and able to supply more, the greater quantities of a particular product. Why is it so? It was taught in a supply analysis because as price rises, ceteris paribus, cost of production, technology, all remaining constant, the profit margin for the supplier increases. And hence, he is willing to supply, he's able to supply more. Why wouldn't he be? He obviously would want a higher profit margin. Economic profit equals to total revenue minus explicit and implicit costs. Implicit costs also include opportunity cost. The accounting profit that we talk of does not account for opportunity cost. It reflects only explicit payments for resources and intangible items such as depreciation and amortization. After studying everything, you may say that, sir, we've understood the characteristics, we've understood the supply analysis, the demand analysis, the elasticity, and everything of perfect competition. But what is the optimal price and output in a perfectly competitive market? What exactly is the quantity of output that suppliers should sell? Or what is the price at which consumers are willing to buy? Before moving directly into this topic, I would say that in a perfectly competitive market, a 1% change in price before listening to my answer, listen to my question properly, pause the video, think of the answer, and then again switch on the video. In a perfectly competitive market, a 1% increase in price will lead to a dash percent increase in quantity demanded. Pause the video, think for the answer, and then start. I'm back. So a 1% change in price would lead to a 100% fall in quantity demanded for a firm operating in perfectly competitive markets. Imagine yourself to be a buyer. Excuse me. Under perfectly competitive markets, there is complete information symmetry. Everyone knows everyone knows about everyone in perfectly competitive markets know the price of the particular commodity. So if some seller increases his price by 1%, why should even a single buyer come to him? He'll go to some other a seller who sells at the price he should sell at. Think about it again. What exactly happens and why does it happen? In perfect market conditions, or what I'd say perfect competition, the firms, the players, they are price takers and not price makers. The reason being is that other firms can enter the market easily and produce a product that is indistinguishable, that is homogeneous, that is exactly the same. One of the characteristics where products were homogeneous and can sell. So why would any other person, any other seller come to you? This would make the firm who raised the price impossible to survive or set its own prices, and therefore firms in perfect market conditions are known as price takers and not price makers. I'm sure you've heard these two concepts, but that's the main reason. Coming down to optimal prices and output in perfectly competitive markets, the equilibrium price and output is determined at the intersection of the demand and supply curve. This is the case everywhere, as we know that the market demand curve is downward sloping while the market supply curve is upward sloping. All the firms in this perfectly competitive markets are very small as compared to the overall size of the industry, and therefore any action taken by a particular single buyer or seller does not impact the market equilibrium. It's an hypothetical market which doesn't exist, and therefore in a hypothetical sense we can say that all firms can sell as much as output as they want at the price set by the industry because they are price takers. Clearly, the demand curve faced by an individual firm is perfectly elastic, that is horizontal to the x-axis, because it does not he cannot impact the market. A firm that chooses to raise even 1% price than that is set by the industry, he will not be able to sell any output. Clearly, the average revenue equals to the price equals to the market revenue, which equals to this demand curve that we've shown. So price equals to average revenue equals to a marginal revenue equals to price. Earlier we saw that the average, and why is that so? Earlier we saw that the average revenue is equal to the demand curve. We did derive that equation of average revenue, and we showed that average revenue equals to the demand curve. And since market revenue equals to price, then average revenue equals to price equals to market revenue. Coming down to the law of diminishing marginal returns, the law of diminishing marginal returns show the U shape of the short-term cost curves. As we all know, average cost is the total cost divided by quantity. Marginal cost is the change in total cost because of one more unit produced. And as we know that fixed cost, for example, rent, fixed cost, for example, uh, fixed prepaid expenses, those do not impact our output. And hence, we can say that marginal cost is impacted only by variable cost. Marginal cost is change in total cost because of change in quantity produced. The total cost is under two bifurcations: marginal cost, fixed cost and variable cost. And since fixed cost does not vary with output, so marginal cost is affected only by the variable cost. The marginal cost curve intersects the average cost curve at its minimum, and therefore firms try to maximize profit at the point where marginal revenue and marginal cost are equal. In the short run, under perfect competitive markets, firms can make economic profits, economic losses, or normal profits. In all the scenarios, either making economic profits, losses, or normal profits, the firm will produce an output where marginal cost and marginal revenue are equal. A loss or a profit depends totally on the situation of the demand curve relative to the average cost curve. If price is greater than average cost, the, the person achieves economic profits. If price is equals to average cost, that is, he's selling at his average cost, then he's attaining normal profits. If price is less than average cost, obviously the person faces economic losses. What happens in the long run? In the long run, all firms only and only earn normal profit. Why does this happen? It happens because when firms in the short run are making economic profits, that incentive, that positive thing about that particular industry will cause other players to enter into the industry. When other players enter into the industry, the overall supply has increased. The overall industry supply has increased. And this, as we all know, that as supply increases, it will lead to lower prices until all firms earn normal profit. If firms are making economic losses, over time firms will leave the industry. It will reduce the supply of goods and create an upward pressure on the prices. Clearly, price is the minimum average cost and economic profit is zero in the long run. Will all the firms exit the industry? No. Firms will still continue to produce the output at a level where marginal cost equals to marginal revenue, and they'll constantly strive to lower their costs. When they lower their costs, again, in the long run, marginal cost will be equal to marginal revenue, equal to price, equal to average revenue, equals to minimum of average cost. The intersection happens at the minimum of AC curve, the U-shaped AC curve. This is the equation that you need to know. On the exam, they will give a hypothetical, maybe a situation, and then say that marginal cost equals to marginal revenue equals to price equals to average. What kind of market structure are we talking about? What kind of market structure does XYZ operate in? Clearly, the answer is perfectly competitive markets. In the long run, there is something else that can happen, and that something else is known as a change in plant size. Earlier in this reading, we did learn that as plant size is increased, as the capacity to produce is increased, as a bigger machinery, as a bigger factory is there, firms initially enjoy economies of scale. Why is there economies of scale? Because of the fact that the person produces more, the fixed cost remains constant, such that the overall average cost starts falling. That is the initial case. Later on, the firms suffer diseconomies of scale. A firm that already operates at its minimum cost in perfectly competitive environment would obviously make zero economic profits. If he does not have the ability, or if he cannot reduce his costs, why will he earn any extra penny? However, as one increases the plant size, as one increases the plant size, one moves into a short run average cost curve, which would give which is lower, and which would again give a chance to earn economic profits. The firms will constantly increase the plant size in the long run till they operate again on a short run average cost curve. We can clearly see in the diagrams. Now, the short run average cost curve, whose minimum point coincides with the minimum point of the long run average cost curve. This point, this is the long run average cost curve. This one is the short run average cost curve, and this intersection is the point where they coincide, point M. This point where the short run and long run coincide is known as the equilibrium point. Beyond this point, a firm will not achieve any benefits of expansion. The firms will achieve diseconomies of scale where the cost is rising, as clearly seen. The cost is rising, and the firm's average cost will also increase. I repeat, I would suggest that you go through this diagram again. In fact, I'd repeat this for you. Initially, the firms increase the size. This is exactly, in fact, how you should divide. What does change in plant size mean? Initially, when the firm operates into a bigger plant, into a bigger factory, with bigger machinery, he achieves economies of scale because fixed cost remaining constant. He produces higher quantity of output and then moves on. Now, clearly, he would suffer diseconomies of scale at a later point. So, at what point should he operate? He should operate at the intersection of the short run average cost curve and the long run average cost curve. He can operate here as well. All the short run, if I make more short run curves, he can operate anywhere. But that is the short run maximizing point. But the point where the long run curve is minimum, and the point where it intersects with a short run curve is the equilibrium point. In the short run, a company in a perfectly economic environment would earn zero economic profits if it's already at its minimum cost, and it cannot lower the cost any further. What is the conclusion? The conclusion here, repeat again, is that a firm may want to increase the plant size in order to reduce average cost, the fixed cost remaining constant. He might want to reduce average costs in order to pocket in the extra profits known as economic profits. But can all firms do that? Is it easy? It is not at all easy, because as firms increase their plant size, the industry supply too increases. And as we had already studied, that as industry supply increases, the prices fall to a level which equals to the new average cost. So again, the firm has to sell at a lower point. In perfect competition, if for any firm incurs economic losses, they will have to leave the industry. Other firms that can reduce their costs by some strategy or the other, maybe by product differentiation, maybe by cost reduction, or any other strategy, those firms will actually downsize. They will move to a smaller plant size. And each of these actions will reduce the industry supply to a point where economic losses are uh, completely wiped out and normal profits jumping. So the firms in long run will not be able to earn uh, any economic profits, but only and only normal profits. The case is something like this, that why exactly should a firm operate in economic losses? It should rather exit the industry, invest those proceeds, and enter into maybe another industry. Their exit would actually reduce the supply and increase the prices for all other firms, and again, equilibrium will be restored. This is the entire concept of change in plant size. Do we need to know this diagram? Do we need to know these points and everything? We do not. In fact, I was planning to not even give the diagram, because at the end it's a multiple choice exam. You are supposed to understand the core concepts and not how to draw diagrams. That is not you which you will be specializing in. The main funda, the main concept, the main takeaway is, as we increase plant size initially, the only caveat is that if the firm is not already operating at its minimum short-term average cost, so I'll repeat, in fact, the entire thing. The entire takeaway is, if a firm is not operating at its minimum short-term average cost, as it shifts to a bigger plant size, initially it realizes economies of scale, where the average costs fall, and then later suffers diseconomies of scale. If a firm already operates at a minimum short-term average cost in a perfectly competitive environment, in a perfect competition world, he would reap nothing but zero economic profits. Finally, we move on to the last section, where we see Schumpeter's take on perfect competition. Joseph Schumpeter suggested that in perfect competition is somewhat a long-run type of market structure. In the short run, when companies develop more new products, get into more innovations, new ideas, those firms get an edge, get an extra cushion over its competition. At this point, the firms enjoy economic profits. The firms love at this point, because their profits rise to an unimaginable level. However, there is something known as a swarming stage which follows, where other outside firms see that this industry is very lucrative. This industry is where lot of economic profits are there, and they try to imitate and copy the idea of that innovative company and that or firm. No longer the innovation remains an innovation. No longer that old company has an extra edge or cushion over other players. And since there is no extra edge, perfect competition exists. And in the long run, perfect competition exists. Now again, someone else will come with an innovative idea, and in the long run, equilibrium will take place until that someone again comes up with a new innovative idea, and the entire chain is repeated. So in a perfect competitive environment, if you need to earn extra profits, innovative profits, economic profits, you need to come with some kind of a new idea, implement that idea, earn economic profits, and thereafter you'll earn normal profits. This is Schumpeter's take on perfect competition. Not directly a part of the learning outcome requirement, but it was mentioned in the curriculum, and hence I am also mentioning it. This is something I think which we already read, knew, with whatever we did talk about change in plant size and all, but a more formal way of introducing this. This was a tough reading. This was on perfect competition, this lecture. The next lecture will be on monopolistic competition, where we'll go through the same sequence, the same LOS requirement. My request, advice, and order to you at the same time is that go through the entire lesson, Go through your notes, revise, review your notes. Thereafter, practice all the questions from perfect competition and complete it once for all. And then move on to the next lesson. I'll be waiting for you. Thank you.